To truly start once again, well met everyone and good evening. My name is Emanuel Socacciu. I'm an associate professor at Faculty of Philosophy, University in Bucharest, and also the academic coordinator of the PPE Masters program. And it is my great pleasure to introduce today our new series called Bucharest PPE Lectures, and also our very first speaker today, Alexandru Volacu. Uh, Now, as part of this series, we intend to run monthly events, so you should expect the next one at the end of April, maybe beginning of May, because we have a short vacation there in Romania, and we will start the series with speakers who are part of the community created around the PPE Masters program. Then slowly, after this initial phase, expand the circle towards inviting guest speakers from other universities and or institutions, surely not only Romania. We have to say that there are two main types of motivation that have pushed us towards organizing and hosting these lectures. In all honesty, the first motivation is to showcase the excellent quality of the people involved in PPE at the Faculty of Philosophy, University of Bucharest. We have amassed, I would dare to say, a truly elite faculty. Our course and seminar instructors are not only outstanding scholars, but also very good teachers. And although it's a master's program that is still young, only in the sixth year, we are proud, we are extremely proud of our alumni, many of them already on track to highly accomplished careers in academia, in business, in civil society, or in government. And we will have guest speakers from both categories, both alumni and faculty. And the second motive to organize the series is, well, we live interesting times. And these interesting times might be saddening, might be annoying, might be frustrating, might be even exciting for some. But whatever feeling dominates us, we live in a world, a very confusing world, seemingly on the brink of something. It's not very clear, though, what that something is, except that it involves major debates, major ideas about politics and economics, and also about philosophy, because ultimately everything involves philosophy, as we all know. So if there ever was a moment for PPE to shine, if there ever was a moment for PPE scholars to have important things to communicate to our society, then probably this is the one. In other words, with this lecture, if you allow me the metaphor, we aim to help with marginally decreasing entropy in this realm of very confusing and conflicting ideas. That being said, explaining our main motivations, let me introduce the speaker for tonight. It is a great pleasure, Alexandru Volacu. He's an associate professor at the Faculty of Business and Administration and a member of the Philosophy, Politics, and Economics faculty. And I remember having the same pleasure of introducing Alexandru as a speaker. I think it was 12, 13 years ago. He was a PhD candidate at the time. And I remember that I used the phrase, then one of the most talented young political philosophers today in Eastern Europe, or something similar. Now, some time has passed, and Alexandru is still young. Let's have this convention that none of us here and nobody that will see the talk later on YouTube, none of us here ever gets old. So Alexandru, of course, is still young, but also already a leading scholar. He has published extensively in top journals on topics in political philosophy, political theory, and policy. He's the author of two books, both of them on topics related to what he will discuss today as part of his lecture. Um, the latest is the limit of the electorate at the University of Bucharest University Press. So before giving the floor to Alexandru, um, two two announcements. The first is you are welcome to ask questions. You are welcome to give feedback. If you don't want to ask the question via your microphone at the end of the lecture, you can write the question in chat, and we'll be happy to pick it up, and Alexandru will answer. The second is regarding uh, the way we will run this today. Alexandru will speak for about 45 minutes. Then we'll move to the Q&A part for another 30 minutes or so. And that being said, that would be the first batch of announcements. Also, I want to thank once again Alexandru for agreeing to break the ice, to be the first speaker in a hopefully long and by the same time next year already well established series of events. And I also want to thank our colleague Ganda Zahiu for organizing the event and taking care of the entire logistics around the event. So that being said, Alexandru, we are all looking forward to hearing why in democracies there seem to be limits to who can vote and who can run for office, and whether those limits are actually justified or not. Right.
So can everyone see my screen shared?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. So first of all, yeah, I'd also like to thank you very much, obviously to Amy for this super generous introduction, and of course I was very happy to and honored to accept the invitation to be the first speaker at these talks. So thanks to both Amy and Anna for the invitation, and of course I'm as Amy said I'm a faculty member of the Faculty of Business and Administration, but I teach a class in the PPE program, a class on evidence-based policies. So you know, for the prospective students that might see this video, we'll meet in the second year, and I have to say that teaching at the PPE program, especially I think because of the quality of the students that are here, is really, I would say, one of the teaching highlights that I have each week. And I can say this since I'm teaching at, I think, about 10 different programs in the University of Bucharest, so it's quite a lot. But I'm always very happy to be here and to teach at PP. So I highly recommend it. Of course, it's a kind of program that exists in a lot of major universities abroad. You know, the Oxford one is very standard. But you know, if you're interested in PP programs, I'm sure that you're already familiar with much of this. So for today, I want to talk a little bit about the what you can see here as the title. So voting and candidacy rights, a normative approach. And I think it's the topic itself is quite important, I would say, in the current context, especially the latter part, so about candidacy rights, because at the moment when this is videotaped, we are in Romania. We're kind of in a period, an intermediate period between another round of elections and another round of elections with several candidates rejected in the first round, prospective candidates who applied that have been rejected in the first round, and as in 2025, it has been widely acknowledged internationally, not only in Romania. There are obviously some problems with the democratic system, yeah, that annuls these elections. Or by contrast, perhaps democracy is working very well, and this is what should be done from a democratic point of view. So I think it's the topic is quite interesting in this day and age. Just to put a little bit of context here. So basically, the talk starts, or the discussion, I think, around voting and candidacy rights basically starts from the general democratic ideal, which is sort of connected, I think, in any plausible account of democracy with the idea of universal voting. So a lot of the literature in political theory on democracy, so this very broad literature on democratic theory, a, a lot of the time basically seeks to justify why democracy is legitimate, or why democracy is better than any other kinds of regimes. And what is actually justified a lot of the times is precisely this idea that we should have universal voting in something like a one person, one vote scheme. So I think this is fairly intuitive. This is, I think, very widely shared and accepted abroad, not only, of course, in the academic community, but throughout society. So, on the other hand, of course, it is true that disenfranchisement is present in any democratic regime. So, while we standardly agree with the idea of universal voting, we also see, even in consolidated democracies, and probably in a minute, it will be much clearer that, in fact, disenfranchisement of some kind is necessary for democracies. So by disenfranchisement, so of course here one important question is disenfranchisement from what? What we're referring to here. So by disenfranchisement, we standardly mean some kind of an electoral exclusion. So you don't have the same package of political rights that most other people have in a democracy. So just from the beginning, I'm assuming that we're living in a kind of a reasonably democratic regime, and I'm interested in this kind of context. So basically, disenfranchisement can mean two things, at least two things, but these are the things that I'm interested in. So a scheme of political rights that excludes you, so you basically don't have the right to vote. In that case, you're disenfranchised, and or alternatively, if you don't have the right to be a candidate, to run for office in elections, then that's another facet, we could say, of disenfranchisement. Yeah, so this is basically these are the kinds of electoral exclusions that I'm going to be interested in, and this is a kind of a two-part presentation. The first one will focus more on voting rights, and this is going to be based on some of my previous work on the book that mentioned earlier, about the limits of the electorate. So this is a book published a couple of years ago, and also on an article that was published since then in the journal Inquiry, which is basically about my own my response to this problem of disenfranchisement. I'll touch upon that a little bit, but I won't just focus on that. So this is the first part, and then the second part is going to be much more exploratory. So this is a work in progress that I'm currently in the very early stages of development, and this is going to be about the right to candidacy. So, or this idea of the right to run for office. So there, everything is much more exploratory. I'm just more interested in, opening up a conversation about some things that I think are important when discussing this right, and not make any, sort of definitive statements regarding this. Okay, so so for the first part, now I will focus just on voting rights, and then you'll see that I'm going to try to make a connection between voting rights and candidacy rights. But for the moment, I'm just interested in voting. So here with voting, I think there are some simple cases. This can apply to candidacy rights as well, to some, but only to some extent. But again, I'm much more interested in voting rights for now. So the basic idea here is that there are some simple cases of disenfranchisement where I think our intuitions are very widely held, and the democratic practice is sort of identical throughout, established consolidated democracies in the current world. So, cases such. So, just think of some of two possible cases. So, one, very small child. So, like, I don't know, think about a toddler or a baby. It seems to me that it's pretty clear that this is going to be a very simple case, that person, although she's a person, yeah, that they shouldn't have the right to vote. Even going increasing the age, to a 10-year-old, maybe 12-year-old, and maybe this is where our intuitions, maybe do not coincide when we're going to be talking about elderly children, let's say. So this is one case, and another one is, so let's think about, some person who is living in Morocco, let's say, and she's a Moroccan citizen. She has no connection to Romania. Obviously, that person should not vote in these elections. Now, you might say that may not be that obvious because there are some authors. So Robert Goodin, for example, does defend this view in a couple of papers that everyone should be enfranchised for all elections. Of course, we should qualify that a little bit, but that's the main idea. But in any case, I think these are super widely held intuitions, and no one enfranchises people such as the ones mentioned before. However, there are more difficult cases where our intuitions don't necessarily converge, and there is no established unitary practice, that all democracies follow. So these are, of course, the more difficult, and these are the more interesting cases. And in my book that was previously mentioned, I basically take each of these groups one by one, and I kind of try to discuss the problems the problems of enfranchisement in each particular case. So I think that there are 5 of these cases, and the first one is with adolescents. So I call them elderly children. I'm not sure that's really the perfect word. So rather, senior adolescents, I think would be the best, and especially 16 and 17-year-olds. So most countries disenfranchise senior adolescents in this age range. However, there are countries, so at the level of the European Union, for example, there are 3 countries that do allow for voting either for 16 and 17-year-olds or just 17-year-olds. And more if we look at the European Parliament elections only. So, again, here, our intuitions might diverge a little bit. Then we have persons with severe intellectual disabilities. Again, this can be a difficult case. Convicted felons as well. So here, again, to take the example of the European Union, the countries are very divided on both of these possible cases. About half, a little bit less, but about half of them have some kind of restrictions for persons with severe intellectual disabilities and convicted felons, not necessarily the same countries, yeah, but about half don't. So they don't have any sort of restrictions here. So this is, I think, another difficult case. And two other difficult cases are residents who are not citizens in a country. So, for example, if the Moroccan citizen was a resident, and especially a permanent resident or a long-term resident in Romania, but does not have citizenship, should they be able to vote or not? And conversely, whether, let's say, a Romanian who has went abroad, especially, maybe especially if they've settled there, they're a permanent resident in, I don't know, France or another country, should they be able to vote back in the elections back home, so in their country of origin? So this is what would be called like the diaspora vote, I think, in the case of Romania. And in the case of Romania, for any non-Romanians who might see this video on YouTube, there is a very big diaspora in Romania. So this is one of the, I think, out of all of these five cases in Romania, perhaps this last one is, the most discussed about in the public space. Um, of course, yeah, but we can get into some of these in a minute. Okay, so again, we have these difficult cases, and I think that, and a lot of the literature, which is basically very much has been developed in the past maybe 20 years, I would say 15, 20 years. There's really been a lot written on each of these cases, and on, more fundamental reasons that we have to disenfranchise individuals. So I've grouped these various accounts into two basic strategies that I've kind of seen repeated in this literature, and I think is a distinction that might be useful for us to understand how exactly we can, or maybe we should justify the disenfranchisement of certain groups of people. So the first one is what I call the presumptive strategy. And this is basically something along the following lines. So universal enfranchisement. So we start from this premise that universal enfranchisement is presumed in a democratic polity, but there is some reason which grounds either the moral permission or the moral requirement to disenfranchise members of the polity who have certain features. So some group has these features, or agents in that group have these features, and they can or should be disenfranchised. So here there's a difference. I'm not really going to go into that. Maybe in the Q&A between permissibility and requirement of disenfranchisement. So again, the basic idea is, everyone should have the right to vote, but here are some exceptions. Yeah, that's the main idea. And why do we have these exceptions? So here there might be different reasons that we're interested in. So let's give an example with children, for example. So children are this case where I think this very interesting case, because it's very implausible. So if you have a disenfranchisement theory that tells you, you have to give the right to vote to 5-year-olds, I think that something went wrong there. So it needs to be refined in some way. Now, some authors are perfectly happy to say that this is what follows, that we should enfranchise everyone regardless of age. But again, I think that's a fairly dubious position. However, at some point, so it's not going to necessarily be the case that if we say children should be disenfranchised, that this necessarily means children up to the age of 18, after which they're considered adults. So, I think there's an interesting way to justify this this sort of disenfranchisement. And there have been two broad reasons. I don't think I put them here, but there have been two kind of broad reasons to say that children should be disenfranchised. And one is children should be disenfranchised because this is going to be in their own interest, in their best interests. Yeah. So you could say this for a number of different reasons. So one is that children just don't know what's best for them. So why don't we just allow adults to decide? Some say, some might controversially, I think, say, perhaps children don't know what's best for them, but parents know what's best for them, and why not just give parents more votes depending on how many children they have. So this is something that has been advocated a little bit in the literature and even in the United States at some point. And it actually has been implemented a long time ago, but I won't go into that. So this is one idea. There have been more sophisticated arguments in favor of this idea, and I mention Anca Gheauș, who's a former. I think she's a graduate from the Faculty of Philosophy, right? I think she was an undergraduate at some.
Yeah, she was my colleague.
Yeah. Okay. So
As an undergrad.
yeah. So she, back when the PPE program did not exist at the University of Bucharest, though, but so she makes this argument in a chapter, a very recent chapter, I think from 2023, that there's this good associated with childhood in particular of carefreeness, and that when we are enfranchising children, we're kind of detracting from their ability to enjoy this, to experience this good of, seeing the world in a carefree way. So I've engaged a little bit with that argument. I won't go into, all the difficulties as well as the positive upshots of that argument, but this is something that could be said at least. So this is one. So let's disenfranchise children because this is in their interest. There's another way to argue here as well, which is let's disenfranchise children not because this would be better for them, but because this would be better for society. Because children are, they don't really know what sort of political alternatives it would be better to choose, and then they kind of detract from the epistemic quality of democracy when we're allowing children to vote. Yeah, so I think so. This is just another way of arguing here. Of course, this raises the question. Even if this is true, there is one question. Immediate. I think should we disenfranchise people on the basis of epistemic quality? Because if we're very attracted to that kind of an argument, then maybe we'd be more attracted to having some kind of competency tests for being able to vote. And many people are not really attracted to that, and many people think that that's quite inimical to democracy. So there is again a difficult problem here, I think, with justifying even this sort of electoral exclusion. But let's say that we buy this epistemic quality argument, then there still remains the question: okay, but why should we necessarily think that if 17-year-olds vote, their vote would be, or they vote with in a very different way, for example, from 19 or 20-year-olds, and that they vote worse in some respect than other adult voters. So the question ultimately remains, and this is it has an empirical component. There can be some analogical reasons offered here. For example, an analogy between the right to vote and the fact that the state is considering that you're responsible because it gives you some, for example, the possibility to work or to get married and so forth at an earlier age than 18. But they don't. The state does not give you the vote. So there are all of these different questions here, which I think make the case for justifying children a difficult one to make, and in any case do not ultimately say something very definitive about disenfranchising senior adolescents. Yeah, but the main point here is just to see how this can be argued. And when it comes to children, I think this presumptive strategy is the one that's really standardly used in political philosophy. But this is not the only group of people where this is used. So a lot of the times, the arguments raised when we're talking about people with severe intellectual disabilities are kind of the same. So they go in the same direction about epistemic problems, but these are the general structure of this strategy is also used in other cases. For example, when it comes to convicted felons. Normally, people don't think that we should disenfranchise convicted felons because they are epistemically inferior or something of this kind, but rather due to some other sort of reasons, which is more related perhaps to some sort of an immoral action that has been taken by them, and then this is a kind of justified punishment for that action. Okay, and we should fill in the blanks in order to have a proper account. But the idea is just that this presumptive strategy is used in different for different groups and is used with different reasons as well. However, the strategy, I think, kind of falls short of giving us the broadest possible picture of disenfranchisement, because it sort of starts from the premise that there is a well-defined political community. So within this political community, we're going to make some exceptions and disenfranchise some people, but the community itself is well-defined, which is not necessarily the case. And I think especially in modern time, not solely in modern times, but perhaps even more so now, when we have this phenomenon of migration, and especially in the European Union, because you have freedom of movement, and then what is the political community when you have all of these constant shifts? So one other strategy that is kind of attuned to this particular problem is what I call the demarcative strategy. So here, what the reasoning pattern is the following. So we don't assume anything about universal enfranchisement, but rather we say from the beginning that only those persons who are members of the polity should be enfranchised. So having some feature is a necessary and sufficient condition for membership in the polity. Those who do not have that feature should not be enfranchised in the P, so in the polity, since they are not members. So, I think it's pretty clear that the cases that this demarcative strategy is interested in are rather those of resident non-citizens and citizen non-residents. So, just to give an example with expats, so the diaspora, so there is a case that can be made here, and Claudio Lopez Guerra, who is a Mexican, I think a Mexican. Oh, he's a philosopher, a political philosopher in any case, who has this book called Democracy and Disenfranchisement, which is one of the most influential works, I think, in this literature. So basically, his view is that expats should not be enfranchised in their home countries. So the Romanian leaving to France, and establishing himself there, should not continue to vote in Romanian elections, because they are no longer members of the polity, because of the principle that we're using, the principle behind which determines who is going to be a member and who isn't. So the principle that Lopez Guerra uses is what's called the all subjected principle. There are different principles that we can use here as well. But the all subjective principle basically says that you are a member of the polity and you should be able to vote in this case to the extent that the state can subject or can coerce you, has this coercive power over you. And Lopez Guerra basically thinks that once you've left, there is another state that has coercive power. So you should now vote in France, for French elections, not in local ones. And there is actually a pretty interesting thing here, I would say, and I kind of highlight this in the book as well, that uh, in principle, residents who are not citizens in a country don't have the right to vote. This is not the case for the European Union, where fellow citizens from other European countries, from countries from the European Union, they must have the right to vote in local and elections for the European Parliament. This is because of the legislative framework of the European Union. However, in a lot of cases, there is no such right. I mean, even if you are a permanent resident, which is very, which contrasts, I would say, with almost the entirety of the political theory that has approached this subject, where it's almost, or because this is political theory and a lot of people normally have very different views, there is almost, I think, a consensus that at least after some time, at least for permanent residents or long-term residents, they should be enfranchised in the country where they are living in. Yeah, so where they're residents. So again, an interesting context. So all of these principles kind of lead to this idea. Okay, so basically this is the main point. This is the way in which the demarcative strategy can be deployed. However, there is also a problem when it comes to how broadly this can be applied, because it sort of has the reverse problem. So ordinarily, this strategy does not make any distinctions within the members of a political community. So if we only use this form of the demarcative strategy, we can't really say something, for example, about children who are citizens in a country. They are subjected to the coercive power of the state, perhaps even more so than adult citizens. We can't really justify their exclusion following this strategy. Okay. So, no, we can just accept this. It's not a fundamental problem. But my own view was that I was a little bit dissatisfied with this approach, and trying to pursue an approach that can give us can simultaneously say something about all of these cases and can indeed be some kind of a general account of disenfranchisement. Something like this has been attempted before, from my knowledge, once by Ludwig Beckmann, a Swedish political philosopher, who basically offers this view that we should look at all of these cases through a contractualist lens. Yeah, so not the Rawlsian kind of contractualism, but rather the Scanlon kind of moral theory, contractualism as a moral theory. But the one of the problems that I kind of saw in that is that, as Beckmann himself admits, it's going to be it's just an open-ended principle. So it gives us a framework to think about, to reflect on all of these problems, but ultimately it won't necessarily give very definitive prescriptions in all cases. So, for example, my own view is that his argument about why we should justify children through the contractualism lens is not that successful, not that convincing, which also refers to the interests of children in one particular childhood good. Okay, so again, dissatisfaction with this approach, and my own proposal, which can be found in Inquiry, in a paper published last year. It's basically this relational account. So just to say what this is, so all and only those who can be reasonably expected to stand in mutual respect for political relations with members of the democratic community, political decision makers, should be enfranchised in C. So, there are a few elements here, and I won't go into, there's not that much time left, so I won't go into, the implications of this theory for every particular case. The main idea is to draw on this relational account of democracy, and of the justification of democracy. So, if you're interested in political theory and in recent developments in political theory, you're probably very aware that there is this, what some have called this relational turn in political theory, which applies to many different subjects. I think it can be said that it sort of begins in discussions about theories of justice. But it sort of moves as well into the broader picture of democratic theory. And there is there are some resources here, and I especially appeal to Eric Beerbohm and his relational account of why democracy is justified, which basically starts from the premise that we shouldn't look at the outcomes of democracy, so we don't have a fundamentally instrumentalist perspective, nor at the procedures. So we're not fundamentally interested in democratic procedures, but rather that democracy is valuable because of the kind of relations that it makes possible between fellow citizens. So I supplement this idea with Stephen Darwar's account of recognition and respect, and which basically looks at the relations between individuals, and in particular at the fact that I'm recognizing other people as fellow citizens, and that they have their own interests that I should factor in, I should take into consideration. So this is basically the groundwork, the normative groundwork that I use, and this is the account that I put forward. So I think this is, and in the article I go to in much more detail here, not much, but in somewhat more detail on the implications. But there are, I think, standard implications on disenfranchising small children, and not disenfranchising many other people categories that I previously mentioned, such as residents or convicted felons, for example, with perhaps an asterisk that I'll actually discuss a little bit later on. Okay, so this is the basic idea. Now I kind of move to the other problem that I mentioned. So the right to candidacy, and maybe I don't know. Maybe if I skip some things, I can be done in 12 minutes to not go over 7 o'clock here. So the right to candidacy, it's unlike the right to vote, there is not that much literature here that we can look at. So of course it's kind of a fertile ground. So if you're interested in electoral rights, this is the moment where pragmatically it would be good to publish something, because it might get cited. So there are some very, let's say, small remarks here and there, even in Rawls's theory of justice, like a paragraph in Charles Bates's work on democratic equality. But in principle, there isn't really a systematic approach, aside from actually these works that I'm citing here, obviously not the Romanian constitution. So the idea here is that there are different ways of actually calling this right, which I'll try to make a broader point in a minute. But in principle, it has been labeled differently while referring to kind of the same thing. So Andrew Eckford calls it the right to run for office, and Jones and Gomez-Ruiz call it the right to candidacy, and Annabelle Ver and Attila Mraz call it the right to stand. And the Romanian constitution, I think, worst of all, calls it the right to be elected, because it kind of suggests that there is a right to be elected, which is I don't think it's the proper terminology. With the other ones, I don't really have any particular problem. So I'll probably going to use this interchangeably: candidacy and right to stand, or right to run for office. But I will get a little bit more into that in a minute. So the fact that there's not much literature on this, I think, is surprising for a few reasons. So first, there is this literature on the right to vote, which I touched upon a little bit, and it's quite extensive. So correspondingly, you would think that there might be some more developed literature here. Also, there is now a pretty ample literature, I think, on democratic backsliding, which is much more empirical in nature, but I think it's starting to make inroads quite seriously in political theory as well. So, for a long time, I think political theorists we're kind of not that paying that much attention to this problem. And even though, democratic backsliding is not something that has just happened last year or something like this, but, people are usually, a lot of the time just drawing on their own environment. So as long as in the West there was no really major problem with democratic backsliding, this was not that taken into account that much. And there's a gigantic amount of literature on why democracy is justified, which is maybe, I mean, it's very good that it exists, but perhaps, we should pay more attention. We should have paid more attention to this problem as well. So now there is this literature on democratic backsliding and on militant democracy. Of course, now this is not literature, and of course, usually when we're talking about militant democracy, the first kind of author in mind is Lowenstein, so it's the 30s. So this is quite an older literature, but even there, I mean, I don't really see that much of a systematic approach to this right to candidacy. There are discussions, very, quite extensive on party bans and so forth, but perhaps, more attention needs to be paid to this right as well. And in other historical contexts, the right to stand was actually central to assessing political systems. So here, I give this lengthy quote here, and I'm going to read it for everyone. So this is from Matthew Simonton's book, Classical Greek Oligarchy, where he basically distinguishes between, he tries to paint a picture on how we're talking about ancient classical Athens, yeah? So how Athenians in that period were really thinking about the difference between oligarchy and democracy. So oligarchia was a politeia in which access to the authoritative magistracies, the archi, was restricted to those in possession of a certain property requirement who constituted the sovereign ruling element. It is important to note what this definition does not say. Oligarchy is not the restriction of the franchise to a narrow body of men. In contrast to the modern period, in antiquity, the mere possession of the ability to vote for office holders was not determinative of constitutional type. What distinguished oligarchy from democracy was that the assembly's role in the former was highly circumscribed, retaining little independent authority. Authority was invested instead in the archi, which were both more powerful than in democracies and crucially available exclusively to the rich. So it's much more about who can occupy these offices that actually wield power in the political system. But in oligarchies as well, there is this in a lot of cases there is this widespread enfranchisement when it comes to the right to vote. So this is not fundamentally the distinction. And of course, Aristotle discusses about this in politics. So it's not something that's that spectacular, when it comes to ancient Athenian thought. Okay. So I'm interested in two distinctions, and the first one is on this distinction between the right to candidacy and the right to occupy public office. So initially I wasn't really interested in this, but thinking a little bit more about this right, it sort of dawned on me that there is actually a conceptual decouplement here that we can do between the right to run and the right to occupy the office. And the second one is I'm interested in this, in the possible connection between the right to vote and the right to candidacy or occupy public office, depends. And so I'm interested in two questions. So the first one is what flows from our understanding of democracy for the asymmetry between the two. And the second one is what can we say about this asymmetry when looking not at democracy, but at democratic properties. Now, I'll explain more about this in a minute. But the main thing to consider here is that in reality, we see that the right to vote and the right to candidacy is not always distributed in the exact same way. So a lot of the times there are more restrictions for the right to candidacy than the right to vote. So think about the Romanian context, for instance, but this is something that exists in a lot of other countries as well. The right to be to run for the office of president, for example, is you're disqualified if you're not 35. You can vote once you're 18 or older, but you can't run up to this much higher age. Yeah. So this is a restriction that I think is obviously in need of a justification. So you can't just reject this right for so many people without a proper justification behind it. Okay, so to start with the first, okay, maybe I can just very quickly say a few things. So does this distinction actually matter? So if you look, for example, at the recent Romanian presidential elections, we can see that there actually have been two different or moments in which candidates were barred from running. And the first one was, before the beginning of the elections and the electoral campaign, and the second one was after the elections, in a way that is not it's not a denial of the right to occupy public office, but it's much closer to that, because in the first instance you had this candidate that was the court considered him eligible, so it was okay for him to run, but then they basically disallowed his candidacy after the first round of the elections. So if they would have done this after the second round, it's possible that this would have happened. So it's possible that we would have had the second round, and then after that, the court could have said, yes, but we're disqualifying this candidate from not running anymore, but rather from occupying public office. So there might be a distinction here. Also, some restrictions on candidacy affect the former, so the right to candidacy, such as signature thresholds, and some affect the latter. So when we're talking about term limits, we're not interested in your ability to run, but rather in your in disqualifying you from occupying that office again. There's now a pretty big, sizable literature on certition. So when it comes to certition, surely we're interested in the right to occupy public office, not the right to candidacy, but there could be interesting discussions here. Somewhat in relation to sortition, there is, we can look a little bit back again at ancient Athens, where we see a political situation that really does have this sort of barring, a potential barring on one of these two rights, and it's actually not on the right to candidacy, but rather on the right to occupy public office through this procedure. I can't go into details now, but there is this procedure of scrutinizing a candidate who has been either elected or randomly selected for office. Of course, most candidates were randomly selected, but some, for example, the generals, were elected. So they could run, they could be elected, but then when they were supposed to occupy office, they could be, through this procedure, they could be blocked from doing so. And we know of one case where this happened. Presumably, this did not happen in that many cases, but again, we know of at least one where this was the case. There may be different normative implications as well. So, for example, if we're actually interested in the right to occupy public office, then perhaps the reasons to disqualify apply throughout one's mandate. So, for example, if I'm disqualifying you because of your failure to defend democracy, as was the case with the Romanian elections. So here this is not just about the right to run in elections, but perhaps at some point during your mandate, the Constitutional Court gets to the conclusion that you've failed to defend democracy, and should they be able to disqualify you from occupying office in that case? So again, I think this distinction might be relevant. So I think perhaps we're actually fundamentally concerned with this right to occupy public office, but there may be good reasons for placing restrictions on the right to candidacy in representative democratic mechanisms. due to, the perception that individuals have on democratic legitimacy and eventually, the question of political stability. So it's rather preferable, probably to, bar you ahead of time rather than, allowing you to run, to win, and then disqualifying you after you've won. Yeah, so this we can see that already. There were protests and so forth generated in Romania, even without disqualifying someone who actually won the second round. So there may be, these very non-ideal reasons to look at the right to candidacy rather than the right to occupy office. Okay. And the second one, and I think the more interesting perhaps one, is this question of the asymmetry. So how should we look at them? Uh, should we look at these as, a kind of package of rights, which can be called the symmetric view? And this is something that has been defended in one of these few papers. Most of these papers are trying to ground this right to candidacy. So, either in like Rawlsian basis of social respect or, in other kinds of values. Maria Gomez Ruiz's paper, however, kind of defends this symmetric view. So basically, we could say something along the following lines. This is not, it doesn't fundamentally draw on her argument, but this is something that can be said here in defense of this view. So we can say, what's democracy fundamentally about? It's about political equality, right? Many, I think the wide majority of recent work in democratic theory focuses, perhaps to the exclusion of everything else, on political equality. So we could say that if democracy is fundamentally about political equality, once members of the political community are autonomous, so we're not talking about the difference between, small children and adults here. So, it's fine to have some sort of constraints such as autonomy, but once, you go past that, all must be granted an identical scheme of political rights. So if you have the right to vote, there's no reason to disallow you from also standing from running for office. Yeah, because this would violate this fundamental principle of political equality. I think this is this is quite intuitively appealing as a proposal. However, we could look at other features of democracy as well. I think, sorry, other constitutive features, yeah, core features that are, you could say, in the nucleus of what democracy is. So here is another view. Call it the asymmetric view broadly, and then a specific account of this. I called it the less restrictive account, super uninspired name, but I'll get to a better one at some point. So the less restrictive account is basically saying that here's what democracy is actually about. It's about what following Josiah Ober I'm calling here demotic control. So it's about the capacity of the demos to be in charge of its own affairs, yeah, to collectively respond to whatever political affairs matters for them. So so if this is right, so if the demos is adequately constituted, of course, this is a question that was part of the first bit of the presentation. There should be no restrictions on its capacity to take fundamental decisions on how to distribute political power. So if we as a society agree that, putting this 10-year-old in charge of the presidency, let's say, is what we, the demos, want, yeah, we should be able, because again, if democracy is really about the kratos of the demos, yeah, we should be allowed to do this. I think from all of the three views that I'm discussing here, I think this is the most unintuitive one. And I've seen even some, repulsion in the past from some people when mentioning this view. So, because of course it can lead to very dubious implications. But again, I think that this demotic control principle is very important for democracy and neglected to some extent. But again, it's something that's really at the heart of democracy. I don't think, just focusing on political equality will give us a proper account of democracy. And of course, in various theories, I'm not anchoring myself in one particular view of democracy, but in various democratic theories, plausible democratic theories, I think both political equality and this demotic or popular control are important. So now we can move to a third view. Call it, well, not, don't call it like this, but tentatively call it the more restrictive account, which basically says that democracy is also about something else. It's fundamentally about relations of accountable representation. So if it is highly unlikely that candidates can meet the demands of such relations once in office, maybe we can permissibly restrict them from running. So this would say basically that even though we are distributing voting rights in a certain way, because it might be possible to give a more restrictive account of candidacy rights because we're interested, because not people would not necessarily be able to join in this relation of accountable representation. And I think some theories of democracy really focus on this problem of accountability. I mean, we can give examples here as well. Okay, so what can we say about candidacy rights from reflecting just on this problem of democracy? Maybe some people will be convinced by one of these views and say, no, democracy is fundamentally about this. And from this, it follows that we should have this particular view. My own provisional, maybe, understanding is that all of these views all of them start from something that's important for democracy. So I don't think that we can really say something definitive about candidacy rights by just looking at this, at core constitutive features of democracy. Okay, that doesn't mean, however, that we can say anything about the right to candidacy by looking at democracy. And kind of the solution that I'm suggesting here is that we look not at core democratic features, but rather at some kind of, I call them democratic properties. Here I'm calling them features, so it's a bit confusing. But there are some democratic properties, I think, that we can look at, and they do say something about these views. So I look at two of them, and that's the final part. So the first one is democratic stability. So for example, I'm putting these together in the case of Romanian presidential elections, or in other examples. The case of the rioters in the January 6th riot in the United States, the president of South Korea, and the attempted coup. Let's just focus on these for the moment. So perhaps we could say that for the sake of democratic stability, we might want to bar certain people from running. So, if the January 6er wants to run for some office, it may be plausible to deny that opportunity, that right, in that case, for the sake of democratic stability. And I think there are two ways of looking at this. One is more retrospective. So we could say people who've shown in the past that they've challenged democracy in this way, and especially in a violent way. So not in the Georgescu way necessarily, but especially in a violent way. So they basically have forfeited claims to equal political relations with fellow citizens. This draws a little bit on my view from the paper that I mentioned, so where I basically say that for violent attempts at subversion of democracy, it may be plausible to deny even the right to vote in some cases. And this is basically the main idea, so that the perpetrator has severed her respect-based relationship with fellow citizens by acting in this way, and it would be hard to accept that she could then turn to other citizens and demand that she continues to exert political power over them when she would have denied them the same claim and would have done so through violent means. So this is more about, it's a backward-looking view, so it's about the way in which we interact and we fail to show respect to other citizens. I think the more intuitively plausible view is rather prospective, so forward-looking. So it's basically, in some cases, it will be very reasonable to believe that if someone actually gets into office, that they will attempt to overturn democracy once they're there. So in that case, again, for the sake of democratic stability, perhaps we can impose additional restrictions. So perhaps if we have very good reasons to think that once you're in office, you'll subvert democracy, or you try to engage in this sort of democratic erosion process, we can use some mechanism to bar you, but not strip you of your voting rights. Yeah. And then another. Okay, I'm skipping over this. It's a bit of ancient political thought as well. Just go to let's go to the second one, and the second one is about democratic equality. Not sure why it's so small, but it's about the so you know we aside from these constitutive features, political equality, democratic control, and so forth, we can have democracy can have also these qualitative aspects to it. Yeah. So for just as a brief example, we usually could say that a democracy that produces better decisions, that's epistemically better, has it's more qualitative in some way. Yeah. It's not at the core of democracy to produce better or worse outcomes. Yeah. But however, this has been used in the past to justify the value of democracy as well. So there is, I think, this qualitative aspect. So, for example, we often bar candidates that do not prove to have minimal support. There was this brief discussion a couple of weeks ago, I think, in the Romanian society about, this list of signatures and so forth. But there is a good reason, okay, not perhaps not to have so many signatures required, but there is a good reason to have some sort of proof of having minimal support, because if not, it's going to fragment the ballot in such a way that it might make it really epistemically difficult to select from one of the candidates. So again, this is something that's related to democratic equality, not to the constitutive feature of democracy. So my again kind of tentative view here is that if we look at these democratic properties, they can support the asymmetry view in the more restrictive account, so that we can impose additional restrictions, with the basic idea being something along the following lines. So the idea is, so what we're trying to explain is why we should have a more, let's say, a broader enfranchisement when it comes to voting rights, but not to candidacy rights. So the tentative idea is that voting rights embody a claim on equal power, and candidacy rights basically embody a claim on having more power. So I'm staking out this claim that I want to hold a significant amount of political power over fellow citizens when I'm running. Yeah. So there are, I think, core democratic reasons from not deviating from equality for voting when it comes to voting rights for the sake of democratic equality, or for the sake of other democratic property, but not in the case of candidacy rights. So I think that we can deviate in the case of candidacy rights. Perhaps it's easier to justify this deviation from political equality. Okay, and the last two things. So, but of course, differential restrictions on electoral rights on the basis of democratic properties must be empirically supported, I think. If you can show that barring this segment of 18 to 35-year-olds from running, or let's say 18 to 33-year-olds from running for Senate positions in Romania, yeah. So if we can show that this does have some, I don't know, epistemic value or something like that, or whatever the reason behind it you think is, it's probably going to be something that requires empirical support. If you can prove this, perhaps these are justified restrictions. But, as far as I'm aware, there are no such, and there are no such there is no such empirical support offered. And the burden of proof, I think, falls on those who would restrict electoral rights. And of course, another idea is for them not to be arbitrarily enforced. So we've seen in the case of Romania that one of the problems here is that all of these restrictions on the right to vote, they really seem to some extent to be kind of ad hoc and fairly unprecedented before the last round of elections. So if you can construct a mechanism whereby, of course, this idea of prospective look at who will subvert democracy, there has to be some kind of a subjective component to it. But at the same time, we should have a kind of a system set up in place where these decisions are not really arbitrary. Okay, and finally, perhaps all of this discussion on candidacy rights, perhaps it's permissible to impose more restrictions on candidacy, but not really obligatory. So perhaps we could leave this to a democratic polity to treat it in a particular way. So there's might be no necessarily universal response to this, which is something that I'm just kind of putting on the table and not pursuing it further. Okay, so yeah, I've kind of exceeded my allotted time by a significant amount, so I'm very sorry, Anda and Amy and everyone attending, but I hope there is still time for Q&A, and thank you very much for being here. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Alex. I think it was fascinating and you gave us a lot of food for thought, very, very provoking arguments. And I'm sure nobody uh, is angry at you for speaking 10 minutes more than announced. So, please, if you have any questions, you can use the raise hand function, or you can write the questions in chat. In the meantime, maybe I will break the ice. I would have lots of questions. Maybe just one very local observation. Maybe it seems to me that the perspective is rather preemptive in that context. And this was the observation, but also this can lead to a kind of worry or two types of worries. Uh, that even if the strategy can plausibly maybe justify permissibility for some restrictions to the right to candidacy, I think many people would feel quite a bit of discomfort at the idea that we can, in a democratic society, preemptively apply sanctions because it is a kind of sanction. I don't want to use the word punishment, but it is a kind of sanction. So why not use the same preemptive strategy when applying criminal sanctions? If I don't know, preemptive policing that was quite discussed a few years ago with AI tools involved and so on and so forth. And I think uh, it's morally at least debatable or a divisive idea, right? And the second type of worry is whether this type of restrictions, even if the democratic qualities approach combined with the more restrictive account might justify, I might be able to justify some restrictions, and I tend to agree with you on that, is whether for democracies itself, restricting candidacy rights in cases at least where there is some degree of support for those candidates might not itself enhance the process of democratic backsliding.
Mm.
Wouldn't it be a way in which democracies eventually shoot themselves in the foot by what critics would say, look, by doing that in the name of democracy, what you actually do is becoming less and less democratic, right? So uh, I was just wondering whether you think this type of worries are warranted and what the response would be.
Yeah, I have the mic on. Yeah, yeah. Of course. I mean, I kind of share these worries, of course. And these are very important questions. So originally, when I started to think about this, I was less concerned with this particular part. This was rather in the context of the elections as well. I was more interested in the other kinds of restrictions that we kind of take as for granted. For even with these ideas that we don't really see as restrictions in the beginning, like term limits and so forth. So in that case, yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I think, the case that if I mean, while I'm worried about the two issues that you mentioned, I think perhaps though in the first case, with the idea of preemptive, I think that there might be some cases where it's going to be fairly clear that this person is really going to be very dangerous for democracy. Now, of course, again, because it's everything is very arbitrary when we're coming to this decision, and I'm not sure necessarily that if we actually look at the decisions in the Romanian context, that these were necessarily that these met this very high mark or standard for justification, but perhaps in some cases they do. Perhaps in well, let me not give any specific examples of current countries that are undergoing this democratic erosion process. But perhaps in some of these, people who have already committed some actions that were very clearly aimed at subverting democracy. It kind of signals what they're going to do in the future. Of course, it's the future, so you can't really say anything with certainty. But there may be a very very high probability of doing this, and then perhaps this does justify it. And with the second one, yeah, but I think that's more of an empirical question, which I think it's a bit too early to tell. Maybe the effects that might be had when we are disenfranchising people in this way, when we're barring them from candidacy, if this will lead to, presumably, I'm imagining that you're thinking about the way in which people form their beliefs on the system and so forth, right? And this consolidates their view that the system is corrupt and so forth, and it makes them more likely to vote for anti-democratic candidates. Yeah, I mean of course, that's a worry, I think, but and we'll probably find out at some point, what what is the actually going to be the case. But yeah, sure, it's something important.
Or let's hope we won't find out.
Yeah, better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have two more questions. The first one is in chat. Monica Lotran, I think you can see the question in chat, right? Monica.
Yes.
I
So
think she asked for clarification on the idea of asymmetry that you
yeah, let me
made.
just read it because I haven't read it, so I can just read it out loud, and people can, if they're doing something else while they're listening to the video. So the expressed individual interest is a base for candidacy or running for office, the office for office, I think. Practically and effectively, isn't it the same individual interest vectoring the universal vote, unless the vote is not compulsory by law? What about an asymmetry in this case? Um, yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, that's the question. Uh,
Yeah,
okay, yeah. So I think if I understand correctly, the justification for the right to candidacy can be put also in terms of individual interest, as is with the case of the right to vote. Uh, yes, but okay, so this is just a little bit of the top of my head. It's a very good question. Um, so I- I'm not sure whether this kind of tells us everything important about this right. Even in the case of the right to vote, I disagree that the only thing important is to look at at the interest of the individual in having, their position, their voice heard, their rights protected, and so forth. I think it's also in part about one's capacity to vote in a way that takes other people's interest into consideration as well. And in the particular case of the right to candidacy, I think this is even a more stringent requirement because you're going to exercise political power that over others at let's say just much more political power than you would in the case of the right to vote. So yes, we should be interested in in allocating electoral rights on the basis of of protecting the interests of the individuals to whom the right is given, but also on the interest on the way in which your vote or wielding of political power affects others in society. So yeah, and I think there is an asymmetry here. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Uh, uh, I think we only have 5 minutes, and we had a couple more questions lined up. First is Dorina Pătrun. So Dorina is also a professor in the PPE program, our colleague at the Faculty of Philosophy. She teaches a gateway course for the first year at the master's program. So, Dorina, welcome.
Okay.
And, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alex. Very insightful, clear as usual, and straight. My question is somehow related to Amy's question. So I don't know, is there any internal or logical contradiction between, I don't know, the statement that elections are free and that restrictions are legitimate? Because in my opinion, there is no contradiction, no logical inconsistency. So if we have in mind, I don't know, the negative ground of free election or to vote free, we admit this kind of freedom with that kind of exception when people cannot do this, when it isn't possible to do this. And I don't know, the positive aim or the positive reason or the positive ground is that no one can be forced to vote. So given that there is no logical contradiction between those two, I think there isn't also any ethical problem here. So maybe, as you say, the problem is just about justification. The reason we are using in, I don't know, in disenfranchising rules and so on and so forth, which is another topic, another kind of discussion, because otherwise I think it's a little bit confusing if we put these ideas in this kind of contradiction. I don't know. It's just a thought. It's not something I run too much. What do you think about?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. I think I agree with the basic idea. So you're saying basically that uh, there is no contradiction between having free elections and having some restrictions as long as they're justified, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean but what so what should be kept separately? Because you said that these are two different discussions.
Because this kind of justification we can have aren't by default complete, or something we can I don't know accept just because they are moral or ethical or something. So they bring a lot of justification from legal points, from juridical points, from, I don't know, what psychological, if you're talking about children or other kind of people who might be accept for this kind of freedom and so on and so forth. So um, I think it's too restrictive, this idea that there is a moral, I don't know, limit.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. I'll think about this a little bit more. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Uh, I think we can take one more question if it's short. And I have there's already one that is lined up. Anda Zahiu, also our colleague, Anda is a PPE graduate, a PPE alumni, so she graduated from the program a couple of years ago, and now our colleague, junior professor at the Faculty of Philosophy, and I'm sure in not a very far future, also a professor in the PPE program. So Anda, up, please.
Thank you. Your introduction was longer than my question is going to be. So I have a very short question, but now that Dorina said what she said earlier, I just wanted to piggyback on what she said a little bit, because I think that there might be cases where you can have a very good justification for excluding someone, either from voting or from running for office, but the criteria, like the general criteria that you use, might be problematic. Or you have cases in which the general criteria that you use to justify exclusionary practices is problematic, but the particular justification that you have for excluding someone is actually very good. I mean, like, at least in theory, I can imagine cases in which that happened. I mean, I actually do believe that it happened in Romania in the first case, where after the first round of elections, where you have a very good criteria but a poor justification.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. So it's a little bit about the part of, not being arbitrary, I think, here now. Yeah.
Yeah. But my question was not about that. It was
Okay.
about the more restrictive account. And I was thinking that this position is not forward looking, actually, it is backward looking, right? Because you're looking at what people did in the past in order to infer something about what they're going to do once they're in office. And I think that this is particularly problematic, right? Because basically you have the evaluation problem that every voter has at the polls, where you have to vote someone, but you don't really know what you're voting for. So you hope that whatever information you possess is enough to make a qualified judgment about what this person is going to do once they hold the office, in the case in which obviously they win the elections. So I'm thinking that like this, I think this is generally problematic for voting and for the right to candidacy, and for this account. But maybe I don't know. I don't know if it's the answer to the question or something like that. But maybe you should take a closer look to the right to hold office, and see, okay, maybe we need a more proof-oriented account. And maybe those restrictions that we apply in the case of the right to candidacy should be, maybe not that substantial, but use, like more restrictions for the right to hold office. Like, if you do this, and that, your right is revoked, because the procedure at the moment is quite
Vague.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
For
So
me, too.
So on the latter point, yeah, I mean, I think that's something that that I could explore a little bit more. I think so the reason why I called it forward looking is that, yeah, of course we're basing our assessment on what happened in the past, but we're not really that's kind of instrumental. The focus is on what we reasonably expect will happen in the future. So that's but of course we're basing that on what sort of information we have on these political candidates. So and this perhaps ties a little bit into what Emi says as well. So I'm wondering, of course, the question is whether we can at least sometimes, so at least in some cases, rely on this information that we have from, the past, the candidates' action, their statements, and so forth, in order to make a pretty strong, not necessarily prediction, but to get a very good idea about what's going to happen in the future. So, I'm thinking about this example where a candidate comes, and in the electoral campaign, they basically say, look, if I'm going to be elected, I will push for the dismantling of political parties. So, no more political parties, no more political pluralism after I'm elected. So I'm thinking even in that case, when the person just outright says that, I'm going to dismantle some core feature of democracy, uh, even in that case, shouldn't we bar him from running? Or her, of course. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, that's kind of an open question. Yeah. But yeah.
It depends who you ask. I mean, remembered. I mean, I don't remember. I wasn't there, but the debates in the Federalists, right? Like a lot of people thought that a lot of parties are bad for democracy because they are a problem for stability. So I guess that you can make an argument that having multiple parties is not what is essential for democracy. And I think that if you look for like essential features of democracy, if you have like an essentialist, I don't know, view of democracy, then you're going to find a lot of people that disagree with you and say, okay, maybe this is not an essential feature of democracy. Maybe something else is, or maybe we don't have any essential features of democracy.
Yes, but I think in that case, I don't know, because parties kind of organically develop, I think, in representative democracies. So my question was rather about you outright banning them. So of course we could say, parties are not really the best tool that we have available in democracies and so forth. But if you would go so far as to ban them, I think at least in modern democracies, if you don't have anything other in place, some other account in place, of course, if you have some sort of a direct democracy, maybe in that case, parties would not be these such important vehicles. But even in that case, to ban them, I'm not really sure that you can have, at least, with our contemporary shared understanding of democracy as representative democracy, that you can have a democracy without political pluralism in this way, and with the ban, with the legal denial of parties. But yeah, I take the point. Yeah.
So I'm sure there would be many more questions, but we unfortunately the time is pretty much up, and I just want to thank you again. Thanks everybody for taking part. Uh, Thank you, Alex, for the wonderful talk, and we'll announce the next one. Keep an eye on our social media accounts. Keep an eye on the PPE website that will be available very, very soon. And yeah, because we are recording this on a Friday evening, let me wish you all a sunny weekend. And if you are watching the video later on YouTube, just we wish everybody better days, right? So thank you all, and see you next time.